Hi and welcome to another Scratch lesson. Today we're going to be doing a reaction times game. So we're putting ourselves in the position of trainee astronauts. In space, things move incredibly quickly. If you were on the International Space Station, as an example, you'd be traveling at about 7.6 kilometers per second. Now that's about 5 miles. So to put that in context, if you were driving along the motorway with your parents going on holiday or something like that, it usually takes around about 20 to 25 minutes on motorways between service stations, depending on obviously which motorway and which service stations, but it's about 20 to 25 minutes. If that was you on the International Space Station, the same distance would take you about 4 or 5 seconds. Not 20 minutes, 4 or 5 seconds, so it's that much quicker. So reaction times are incredibly important. If you imagine that you've got to, when you're looking out, if you see something 5 miles away, you've got 1 second before that object is with you. It, could potentially hit you. So if there's lots of debris around, which there is in space, then if you see it, you've got very little time at all to actually react and move out of its way. Now, fortunately for people on the space station, a lot of the debris is known. So it's been mapped and they know roughly where that is and where it's moving and how quickly it's moving. But there are still some reliance on actually manually moving things and actually adjusting and spotting things. So as things move that quickly, you have to react super, super quickly. Now we're going to pretend that we're training astronauts and we're going to test our reaction times today. Now there's an instruction guide below the video on a link, and we're going to be roughly following along. Now there is a slight adjustment that I'm going to be making that I'll do in the video that won't be in the instructions, which is that if you're using an iPad or some kind of tablet, you don't have a space key. Now in the game, when the space key is pressed, that's what detects the reaction time that you've done. Now if you haven't got a space key because you're using an iPad, then we have to do something differently. So the video that you're going to watch now will have an extra part in it, adding a button that then is going to trigger the stopping of the timer the same way as the space key would stop the timer. So let's get started. Now I've already logged into Scratch. If you're not part of one of these lessons or something, the link to the starter project is below. But if you're logged in and you're following along as part of one of the lessons with me, then I've logged in. You can see the username at the top. I'm going to click on the username. Now, if you've just logged in, you should be able to see my class. If you're on one of the other screens, things like the create screen, quite often when I click on this, it won't show my class. So what I'll need to do is go to my stuff first, and then I can go to my class. Now that I'm in this class, you'll see in the studios, we've now got, because we've done several lessons before, we've got several studios built in there already. And the teacher resources one is just to the right. So if I click on that, you can see the starter project that we've been working on over the last few weeks. The one we're going to be working on today is this one, obviously, astronaut reaction starter. So I'm going to click on this. And then once that's come up, we're going to click on remix. This is so that you can make your own version. And it creates a blank version. The sprite that you need is there. The background that you need is already added. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change this so that I'm going to change the name at the top to be astronaut reaction, and you could put your initials or your name or whatever on there. So I'm going to call this prof code. Getting started then. What we want to do first is when we click the green flag, we're going to have a bit of a welcome message that our astronaut here, Tim Peake. Tim Peake's one of the, I don't know if you remember recently, he went up into space and spent a lot of time on the International Space Station. So we're going to have him doing our reaction testing today. So the first thing, when the green flag is clicked, I want him to welcome people into the game. So I'm going to click, the event is when the green flag is clicked. I'm going to drag that over. I'm just going to zoom in so that you can see this a little bit better. Okay. And what I want him to do is I want him to say a message, only for a short period of time, but I want him to say a message on the screen. Now, if I click the green flag now, you can see he says just hello. That's a bit boring though. So I'm going to say, hello, British astronaut Tim Peake. Ooh, I missed a space. Okay. Here, let's test your reactions. So now if I click the green flag, I've got a bit more of an interesting message. You see it only pops up for 2 seconds. If you wanted, if you think that's not long enough, you can adjust this, make it 3 seconds so that people can actually have a bit more time to actually read it. But that's something you can adjust in your game. Then once that's disappeared, we're going to have a message that says, that gives a little bit of instructions for the game. So it's just going to wait between, so I'm going to go to control and get the wait block. So just between that message and the next one, it's going to wait a second, and I'm going to say another message. And you'll see this time I haven't put for 3 seconds. I'm going to have it up there until the next part kicks in. So press the space key or button because we're adjusting. I've missed we're adjusting the instructions so that you can either press the space key or the button that we'll put on the screen to stop the timer. When I say go. Okay, so let's test that bit. The green flag says the message, and it goes off, and now he gives the extra instruction. So what we need to do now is we need to add a random amount of time before he says go. If it was the same every time, it'd be easy just to kind of count up and click, and you know when it's going to come. So it's got to be random for it to test reactions. So we need to pick a random number. Now this is one of the mathematical things that we can do, and it's really useful in games sometimes to pick random numbers. It's dead easy to do. So I'm going to add a wait block because what we're adding is how long he should wait before saying go. But rather than it just being 1 second, it's going to be random. So I'm going to go to the green maths blocks. I'm going to pick a random number, and I want it any time between 1 and 10 seconds. So this means that it will choose maybe 5 seconds one time, the next time it might be 8 seconds, the next time it might be 2 seconds. You just don't know. So the player hasn't got a clue when the go message is going to come up. So it does that, and then the next step that he's going to do is actually just going to say go. So let's make it the same. So in the instructions, it was go in capital letters, so I've just adjusted that. Just makes it look a bit more consistent. So now if I press the green flag, we get the welcome message. Goes off, we wait a second. We have the instructions, and then very quickly on that one, we said go. So let's try that again. I've hit the green flag. Here's the instructions. And then it says go, and he's waiting. And this time, actually, there's a much longer wait. So you can see the difference. So that's the start of the game. But what we now need to do is we now need to have a timer. We need to know how long it is between him saying go and the person either clicking the button or pressing the space key. So you could build a variable and have it count up every 0.1 second or something like that. But actually, there is something built into Scratch to do to time things. And it's really good for timing between two events. So between, in this case, the go message and somebody clicking on something. It's not brilliant for actually starting the game and kind of getting to 30 seconds before the time runs out on a level or something like that. That's always, well, usually better using a variable. But in this case, we've got very fixed. We know when the go message comes up. I mean, we're just detecting the press of the space key or the button. So we're going to use this thing in sensing called the timer. And all I've got to do is make sure at this point the timer goes to 0. So in this game, the timer is always counting. We don't have to start it or stop it. It's always counting. It starts basically when the green flag is clicked. But what we need to do is at this point, we need to start that, reset it and start it at 0. And then when we press the space key or when we get the button click, that's when we stop it and display the time that it was on. So as we need the space key or we need the button click, this is now a good time for us to add a button onto the page. So I'm going to go to choose a sprite. I'm going to choose one of these. Now I can see already under here, I've got the buttons on the screen. If maybe you're using a smaller screen, you can't see as much, you can use this search at the top and just start typing button, and you'll see that it gradually filters down. Now I'm going to use this green button, circular one, and I'm going to pop it down in this corner, I think down here. And on this button, I'm going to have an event that starts when the green flag is clicked and carries on forever. And all it's going to do is forever, it's going to broadcast the message. Let's call it clicked. But it's only going to do that if the button's clicked. So actually, do you know what? Let's change that. I'm going to just use this. I was going to put an if in there to say when this sprite is clicked, but actually I can just do it with the 2 blocks, which is much more efficient, rather than adding an if in here and then detecting if this is pressed or if the mouse down or whatever, or it's draggable. There's loads of things that we could do, but let's have it with the just 2 blocks, which is nice and easy and done. Okay, so we're going to broadcast this message. Now back onto our astronaut. We've got this load of code here. Okay, so this is where it gets a bit different to the instructions, because we need to deal with the button being pressed or the space key being pressed. So what we're going to do is we're going to, as we've got on here, the sprite creates this broadcast message called clicked. What we're going to do is actually have it the same to say that forever, if the space key is pressed, we're going to broadcast that same message. So I'm going to go to sensing, and if the key, we're going to choose the space key. So if yours doesn't say space key there, make sure it's changed. So we're going to say if the space key is pressed, then we're going to broadcast the same message. So under events, we've got the broadcast, and I'm going to broadcast clicked like that. Then, so we've got either way of broadcasting this click message, either by the space key being pressed or by the sprite, as in the button being pressed. So both of those will trigger it. So what we now need to do is say that when it receives that message, that's when we need to basically show the time. So let's just do that very simply to begin with. So we're going to just make him say the time without any bit around it. So I'm going to go to looks again because the say bits are in there. So I'm going to say, and under sensing where that timer was, you'll see that there's a variable just below that's already set up for that timer. So I can pop that in there. So let's test that now. So if I click the green flag, we've got the welcome message, and it says press the space key when it says go, and it says go, and I press the space key, and it was 1.06 seconds. So let's try that again. This time I'm going to click on the button instead and see if that works. So waiting for the message to say go. Said go, so I click on the button and it shows the time. So both those methods work, either the space key or the button. I think we can do better than just this this number though. I think it doesn't really tell you what it is. So what we want to do is we want to combine some text with that number. To combine things together, there's an operator. Again, it's kind of mathsy. It's you're putting things together, but it's not maths. It's what we call strings. So strings are letters and numbers and symbols and things all combined. So anything that's that kind of is a string of letters and numbers and stuff. If it's numbers on its own, then they are numbers. If it's whole numbers, they're called integers. So in gaming and things like that, you'll have what's called variables, which we've dealt with before. And quite often in programming language, you need to say which type of variable things are. The most common are strings, integers, and decimals, or floats. In this case, though, we're going to join two things together. So I'm going to bring over a join, and actually I'm going to bring over two, and you'll see why in a moment. So I'm going to put the timer in the first one of this one and say seconds. Okay, so we know that that timer will say, so in this last case, it was 1.41, it was in that number. So it'll, and watch what I do here. I'm just going to put a space in front of the word seconds. So it's 1.41 space and then the word seconds. I'm then going to put that one in the second block there. So hopefully you can see there that it's now got something 1.41 seconds. So your reaction time was, and I'm going to put space at the end as well. So remember, I need a space between the word was and then the number, and then obviously I've got a space before the word seconds as well. And then I'm going to pop that in as the message that's going to be said. So let's test that. There's the welcome message. Waiting for him to say go. I'm going to click on the button when he does. Okay, so the go message is there. I'm going to click on the button, and then we've got this much nicer message saying your reaction time was 3.135 seconds. So kind of works pretty well like that, but what I also want to do is a little bit of extra maths. I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge. So we said at the beginning that the International Space Station travels about 7.6, it's actually 7.66 kilometers per second. What I want you to do is add a little bit of maths into this game. That say your reaction time was 3.135 seconds, that displays how far the International Space Station would have traveled in that time. So we're going to, it's only very simple maths, but we're going to add it so that the kind of program does it on its own. And to do this, we're going to store the distance as a variable. So I've clicked on variables here. I'm going to go to the button at the top that says make a variable. And I'm going to call this kilometers. Okay, and it's going to be for all sprites because there's only one player on this game. It doesn't matter, so it's not specific to this one sprite. So I'm OK on there. Okay. Now, I don't need it to show on the screen. It's just going to be there for us to actually put that number into, so we can then display it later. So again, where it's been made on this left-hand side, there's a blue checkbox there. So I'm going to untick that, and it just means it's not displayed. It's still available. I can still use it. It's just not displayed on the screen. Once we've shown the time on the screen, we're going to set our kilometers, the distance that we've done. We're going to work out how many kilometers that is. So we know how many seconds the reaction time was. And what we need to do is multiply that by how many kilometers that the International Space Station would have traveled in those seconds. So it's just a multiplication sum. So again, I'm going to go to operators for those mathsy bits. I'm going to get the star. Don't forget, in computer language, X is not used as times, star is used as times. X is a letter. So it's just to differentiate between letters and numbers and symbols and so on. So the star is the time symbol. And what we're going to do is we're going to say the timer. So I'm going to go to the sensing again and get that timer variable. And because we're dealing with the International Space Station, we're going to set this times by 7.66, which is the speed the International Space Station travels in 1 second. Now, we've got that number. What we need to now do is display that on the screen. So we've got the message popping up to say that the reaction time was there. We then calculate the distance. I want to wait a small amount of time, so maybe 2 seconds, and then I'm going to show how far the International Space Station would have traveled. So again, I'm going to do a say block. And I'm going to put say underneath. And I'm going to join parts of a sentence together because I'm going to use that kilometers bit. So if I go to operators to do join, and in this case, I'm going to do 2 of these. And let's put in, I want the variable, so I want the kilometers. And don't forget, I've got the number for the kilometers, but before I have the word kilometers at the end, I need space. So I'm going to say space kilometers. And so I've dragged that into the second part of that block there. So they're kind of joining the joins. And then in the first plot, so I'm going to say in that time, the ISS travels, I've got a space, and it should say that there. So I'm going to pop that now into, instead of where it says set hello, and pop that in the bottom there like that. So let's test that. So if I hit the green flag, game starting. When it says go, I'm going to click the button, shows me the time, which is 1.93, and then actually it gives us the distance it's traveled. Now this next part is up to you. I quite like the precision of this. I quite like that it gives you 14.65 and so on kilometers. But if you wanted it just to say 15 kilometers because it's rounded up or down, you can round this to the nearest whole number. And if I go to the green operators bit, you'll see near the bottom now I've got one called round. All I'm going to do is get the number that is in the kilometers, round it to the nearest whole number, and that's the bit that I'm going to show instead. Okay, so let me just show that bit again. Just moved things out of the way. So they're still in there. So that's how it's, oh, sorry, did one bit. So that's how it started. In that time, it travels kilometers. That would be a decimal number. I'm going to pull that out, put it into the rounding function, and then I'm going to pop that back in where it was. So now if I hit the green flag, we get the welcome message, we get the instruction, and then when he says go, hit the green button, it's 0.7 seconds, and it's now a whole number rather than the decimal. If you prefer the decimal, that's absolutely fine. So that's the end of what we're going to do as a kind of a guided lesson today. So if I just zoom out of that, you'll see this is the code that we've just produced. There is in the instructions a challenge, so that because in traveling to space, there's lots of vehicles that are used. So the International Space Station is one of the vehicles. If this was returning home, they might use the Soyuz capsule, which is the kind of the tip of the rocket that you see traveling up to space. And that's the bit that the crew actually travel in. It could be a Falcon 9, which is the new style rocket that's gone up. And they all travel at different speeds to each other. Because they're just designed differently, and maybe they travel different speeds for different heat reasons, or for because that's the way they work, or whatever it is. So you could adjust this. So rather than maybe, so the Apollo 10 travels at 11.094 kilometers per second. So that calculation of where you're multiplying the time that it took by how many kilometers per second it was. You could do that. So that's the end of this project for working on it. If you're following one of the lessons and you're going to share this with me, the next step is just to make sure that it's saved. So I'm going to click on File and Save Now. Saves it to your account on Scratch. And then I'd like you to hit the Share button. Now it should kind of grow green at the top and say congratulations on sharing your project. And then at the bottom here, you've got this option to add to Studio. So I'd like you to click Add to Studio, and then you've got Astronaut Reactions Pupil, which is where the pupil files go. So I click on that, goes green, and then I hit OK. Easy as that. And that's it. I really look forward to seeing some of your games. If you want to make some tweaks and changes, by all means do. Just when you go in, maybe give it a different name so that I can see that it's your version, or whatever, separately to this one. Brilliant. Look forward to seeing them, and see you again soon for another lesson.